We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar plan, a coalition of over 20 nations, and one incredibly ambitious goal: rebuilding Gaza. Today, we're going to dive into Donald Trump's Board of Peace. But the real question is this a genuine blueprint for stability, or is it a plan that's just destined to fail? With so many moving parts and a long, long history of failed peace plans in this region, the big question you have to ask is, can this one actually work? Let's break it down.
Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, what exactly is this Board of Peace? Then we'll get to the multi-billion-dollar question. Who's supposed to pay for all this? After that, who's going to provide security on the ground? Then we'll look at the reality inside Gaza today. And finally, we'll size up the biggest obstacles standing in the way of the whole thing.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute centerpiece of this entire strategy. It's called the Board of Peace, or BOP for short. This thing was officially set up back in January, and it even got an endorsement from the UN Security Council. Its mandate is, well, it's huge. We're talking about overseeing literally everything, from governance and security all the way to the complete reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. And sitting at the head of the table as chairman? Donald Trump himself. And believe me, this isn't some small get-together. More than 20 countries are involved. And think about this. It's bringing regional rivals, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, all to the same table. You've also got key Muslim-majority nations like Indonesia and Pakistan in the mix. And, in what is a really significant move, Israel has also joined the board. So what you end up with is this very broad, but also potentially very fragile coalition. Of course, a plan this ambitious needs a massive amount of funding. Rebuilding Gaza is going to cost billions upon billions. So that leads us to the really big question: who's going to pay for it? And I'm not exaggerating here. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar fund. The scale of the destruction is just so immense that it requires a massive financial commitment right out of the gate, just to get started. The strategy on paper seems pretty straightforward. Get the wealthy Gulf states, specifically Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, to foot the bill. Now, Washington has described the initial offers as generous, but when you start looking behind the scenes, the story gets a whole lot more complicated. And this quote from Qatar's prime minister just cuts right to the heart of the problem. The entire plan basically assumes the Gulf states will provide the funding, but key players are pushing back, arguing that they shouldn't have to pay to rebuild what others destroyed. With Saudi Arabia also being pretty hesitant, the funding for this multi-billion-dollar plan is suddenly looking anything but secure. Okay, so money is a huge issue. But even if you had a blank check, you've got the massive challenge of security. And that brings us to the second major pillar of this plan: a UN-authorized international stabilization force. So this proposed International Stabilization Force, or ISF, it basically has a four-part mission. First, secure the very fragile ceasefire. Second, assist with general security operations. Third, oversee the demilitarization efforts. And fourth, provide humanitarian support. Each one of those is an incredible challenge, which makes this an extremely complex and unbelievably dangerous job. Now, this isn't just an idea on paper. There has been one very concrete commitment so far. Indonesia has announced that it's preparing up to 8,000 troops for a potential peacekeeping role in Gaza. Indonesia's commitment is definitely a start, but let's be realistic, an 8,000-strong force is just a fraction of what would be needed. The success of this whole thing really hinges on getting buy-in from other regional powers. So the question is, are they willing to commit their own troops? Well, so far the answer seems to be a pretty resounding no. Arab states are deeply hesitant, and for a few big reasons. They're afraid their troops would be caught in the crossfire between Hamas and Israeli soldiers. They're also really wary of being seen as enablers of an Israeli occupation. And on top of all that, Hamas has issued direct warnings to any foreign troops on the ground. So when you add it all up, the risks, both political and physical, are just too high for many to even consider. This all brings us to the situation inside Gaza itself, because at the end of the day, any plan, no matter how detailed it is, has to contend with the hard facts on the ground. And this right here shows one of the core challenges. Gaza isn't a unified territory right now. It is literally split, with Israeli forces occupying over half the enclave while Hamas still controls the center. Now, that's not just a line on a map. It represents two separate realities, two different sets of authorities, and a constant potential for friction that an international force would have to navigate minute by minute. And the very foundation this whole plan is built on, the ceasefire, well, it's crumbling. Since it began, reports say it's been riddled by violations. this isn't a stable peace. It's a tense and very frequently broken truce, and every single violation erodes trust and makes the mission of that proposed security force exponentially harder before a single boot is even on the ground. So when you put all these pieces together, the questions about funding, the reluctance to send troops, the unstable reality on the ground, you start to see some very, very big hurdles. But maybe the biggest hurdle is the most fundamental one, the political standoff. The plan demands that Hamas members disarm in exchange for amnesty. Hamas's position is just as firm: no disarmament until the Israeli occupation of the entire Gaza Strip ends. I mean, these are two completely irreconcilable positions. Right now, there is just no middle ground. So, to just quickly recap, this plan is facing 4 massive challenges. The money is insecure, the troops are hesitant to commit, the ceasefire itself is barely holding, and at the very heart of it all is a political deadlock on disarmament that neither side seems willing to break. So we're left with this grand plan from Washington and a harsh, harsh reality on the ground in Gaza. Yes, it's a comprehensive, internationally backed strategy, but it is running up against decades of conflict, deep-seated mistrust, and an incredibly volatile political landscape. It makes you wonder, the real question isn't just whether this plan can succeed, it's whether any plan from the outside can truly bring peace to a place so profoundly broken.